Hi there. The elemental system is very closely tied to how Genshin Impact combat works, and for that reason, I like to rank which elements are the best and which elements are the worst. And while the contention for the bottom 3 is something that a lot of people don't agree on, the contention for number 1 is a very common consensus. That being Hydro. Ever since the game came out, the Hydro element has been one of the most useful elements in the entire game by allowing you to use some of the most overpowered reactions in the game's history, which in and of itself is not that amazing until you realize that pretty much every overpowered thing in Genshin Impact's entire history needed to use Hydro as a backfoot. For that reason, every time a Hydro unit comes out, it is guaranteed that that character is going to be at least good, if not great, solely due to the element they have tied to them. And while Hydro has always been dominant ever since the game first came out, I don't feel like a lot of people remember just how interesting Hydro was on release. You see, when Genshin first came out, the options for Hydro characters were very limited. The only choices you really had at the time were Barbara, Jingshou, and Mona, and that was it. And you would think that for this reason, Hydro was not that strong. And you'd be wrong, because Hydro was overpowered even on release. You see, the version 1.0 meta was entirely based around how much damage can you do in a single slash. It was like a really big dick measuring contest for the whole community. Which means when we were looking for really powerful characters, we were looking for the elemental system that was A, the simplest to understand, and B, that did the most damage, which automatically weeded out everything except for the Cryo, Hydro, and Pyro elements. Diluc was an amazing Day 1 DPS. He was the best DPS in the game Day 1. And unfortunately, Diluc is very hard to use. Or so we said at the time. Little did we know that Chongyun Diluc is not a very good match. But to some of the more astute users of Genshin's Impact system realized that if they matched Diluc with Jingshou, they were able to do significantly more damage by applying Hydro to their Diluc and then using that to vape. For this reason, even in the beginning of Genshin's existence, Jingshou was one of the most powerful units in the game because he provided the most powerful support to the most powerful DPS in the game. And even though the other options weren't that good, Mona and Barbara, they still were really powerful. For the longest time, Mona was the backbone in one-shot comps, which required you to do as much damage as you could in a single slash. These teams usually consisted of Mona, Sucrose, and Bennett, and then some sort of DPS. Sometimes people would even use Diona. And even though these types of one-shot teams are inoptimal now, at the time they were very powerful because most normal enemies and trash mobs would go down in one major blow from this because the devs, quite frankly, did not expect people to be doing this. Fast forward 2 patches, and Ganyu releases, who I have talked about extensively before. If you don't remember how powerful Ganyu was on release, it was something special. Most of the community members were trying to boycott Genshin because of how powerful Ganyu was. And even though she's a cryo character and shouldn't be relevant to the video, I still feel like I should mention her because this was Mona's peak. And Mona being one of 3 Hydro characters means essentially 33% of Hydro got a bonus in this patch. Words cannot describe how dominant Morgana comp was when Genshin first came out. The team consisted of Diona, Venti, Mona, and Ganyu, and required you to group everything up with Venti, apply Cryo with Diona, battery the team, heal the team, shield the team, buff the team with TTDS, apply Hydro to freeze them solid, and then buff your entire team by 120% with the burst, and then go to town with Ganyu. Mona is the Mo in Morgana. This team was so powerful it caused a meta break in Genshin's system and shifted the entire future of the game towards single target DPS for the foreseeable future. And this team only existed specifically because of the Hydro element. At this time, the freeze and vape reaction were so unbelievably overpowered that MiHoYo had to make future enemies resist freeze. Not long after people started using Ganyu, a lot of people began to realize how powerful the elemental reaction systems are. The astute of you may realize I purposely forgot to mention a character, Tartaglia. On his release, a lot of people said that Tartaglia was one of the worst 5 stars in the game, and because a lot of the quote-unquote meta content creators at the time were just stealing their information from Chinese sources, nobody really gave much of a fuck to test out how strong Tartaglia really was. YouTubers Jinjinx and Tuner made a video talking about how Tartaglia is not an DPS in the inherent sense, but is rather an enabler for the whole team. Unfortunately, at the time, most people were new to the game, so it was really hard to build a whole team around Tartaglia. This changed in late version 1.2 when a lot of the general audience that pulled Tartaglia were able to finally fully build their team. This led to the first version of one of the most infamous teams in Genshin's history, the International comp, a team consisting of Tartaglia, Xiangling, Bennett, and then a flex buffer that would make the team amplify its damage significantly. Even though Tartaglia wasn't the one doing the most damage on this team, he was still very competitive with Xiangling, and was able to make it so that she could vape on every single hit. Jingshou was a really good Hydro applicator, don't get me wrong, but it didn't have anything on Tartaglia, who was able to instantly apply Hydro on every enemy no matter how much they were able to take from pyro damage due to Tartaglia's unique Riptide mechanic. This allowed him to mark enemies with charge attacks, which would then explode into Hydro every so many hits, applying extra ticks of Hydro. And because Tartaglia attacked so quickly, he was easily able to rack up the 1 to 3 hits needed to apply Hydro ticks on the enemy. This made it so that Xiangling's burst was a menace, dealing easily up to 40,000 damage a rotation if you had a well-built Xiangling, which, by this point, version 1.2, early 1.3, most people had. Which means, as it currently stands, in this point in the meta, all of the best teams in the game have one Hydro unit on it that cannot be replaced. Jingshou for Vape, Mona for Morgana, and Tartaglia for International. But Hydro only gets better from here. The next unit we got to represent the Hydro element was Kokomi, unfortunately. Now, on release, I'm not gonna sit here and cope you. Kokomi was not good. She had a viable spot on freeze teams, which was whatever, but she really didn't do much else. Kokomi isn't as bad as other people would lead you to believe, but she is just an overall meh character. Her Hydro element definitely did save her. Unfortunately, it wasn't until the release of something later on where she became as powerful as she is. And unfortunately, the same thing can be said about Ayato, who was essentially just a side grade to Tartaglia, which means he is very powerful, but he just wasn't that impressive, all things considered. This is mainly because during this time, Mihoyo was scared to make Hydro more powerful than it actually is. Taser team comps became very common in the era of Inazuma due to the heavy emphasis put on the Electro element. It became a lot easier to maintain Taser teams with characters like Raiden Shogun and Jingshou working together. And even though by the time of Ayato's release, Ganyu wasn't as powerful as she used to be due to the Morgana team getting gutted, mostly because a lot of Inazuma enemies are just straight up immune to CC, Hydro was still really powerful. Vape is still really good, Taser is still really good, and International is still amazing. So Mihoyo was nervous to make the element much stronger than it was, and for that reason we didn't get a lot of Hydro reps. But I guess they just threw all that shit out the window with the release of Sumeru. That's right, you knew this was coming. As if Hydro wasn't already stacked enough with the Vape reaction, the Taser reaction, some of the most benefits from Swirl, and the Freeze reaction, Mihoyo decided to give them access to Bloom and Hyper Bloom. And to any of you that have played Genshin for more than 5 minutes, you probably know that the Dendro reactions are really overpowered. And Hydro is what enables the most overpowered reactions. Hyper Bloom, Burgeon, and Bloom are one of few 3-step reactions in the game, the only other one being Shatter. They have a 300 times multiplier on Bloom damage if you Burgeon or Supercharge it, meaning that even very early on, people were building high Elemental Mastery Electro characters or Fire characters with the use of Toma to proc Burgeon and Hyper Bloom to triple X the damage of Bloom. With the release of characters like Nahida, Sino, Nilu, and who could forget our boy Alhaitham, the Hydro element became invaluable on a lot of team comps because it is what enabled this overpowered reaction. The game was dominated by Hyper Bloom team comps for ages. It is one of the reasons why Sumeru is as hated as it is when every character that released only built onto one of 3 teams. But I'd be lying to you if I told you these teams were not ridiculously overpowered. Pretty much every team that used any type of Bloom reaction would easily curb stomp the Abyss without any difficulty whatsoever. And you would think that's it, huh? You would think that's its peak. Hydro has been overpowered in the meta for years at this point. You would assume that they just wouldn't make it much more powerful. But you see, no, Genshin has this system where a lot of units come out and they are really good. But then the nation revolving around that element comes out and buffs the element even more. And the same thing happened with Fontaine. At this point, the only thing Hydro was missing was a main hyper carry DPS, because Hydro, as it currently stood, was an enabling reaction that made other units stronger. And I guess Mihoyo decided, man, fuck all that, here, take Neuvillette. Neuvillette is the most disgustingly overpowered thing in Genshin history, and I will die on that hill. Neuvillette is a hyper carry DPS that pulls insane HP modifier from his kit. Now, HP modifier damage in Genshin is incredibly powerful. Characters like Yelan are easily pumping out 16k an arrow because of HP scaling. Neuvillette has double that, meaning it's very easy for him to hit 32,000 damage on auto attacks, and this is because HP scaling draws upon your max HP, which can go up to 50,000 in Genshin very easily, and then it'll take a percentage modifier, multiply it by your Hydro bonus damage, and then double it if you have high enough crit damage. Triple it even if you have over 200, which is also very easy to do, because Neuvillette is one of the only characters able to use the overpowered Hunter set, which buffs, significantly buffs mind you, your crit rate, up to 36%, 72 free CV, and what do you have to do? Lose HP, and regain it. And what does Neuvillette do? He loses half his HP and then heals it all back. Neuvillette is so ridiculously overpowered, you can bring him into Spiral Abyss by himself and he will more than likely be able to 36 star without any help. But no, he's not strong enough because Hydro needs another hero. We need another savior. Mods, release the Furina. The 132% damage bonus on ultimate, healing, off-field DPS, and Hydro application all in one. Furina at C0 is really strong. Very strong. She's hard to play with because you have to build a team around her, but if you manage to play her properly, she will dumpster the game by giving you insane buffs, healing, and dealing off-field damage. While I usually don't like to talk about constellations, C2 Furina is even more overpowered. Furina at C2 is the best character in the game, only beaten out by C6 Furina or higher cons of the same character, due to her being able to sufficiently heal the team without any help, buff the team without any heal, and then deal, 52,000 damage every couple seconds. It is insane how strong Furina is, and with the release of Neuvillette and previous Hydro elements, Furina made most of their team significantly more powerful. Double Hydro Neuvillette Furina became the mainstay carry on every team in the game. If you used Hu Tao Soup comp, which was Hu Tao and 2 Hydro to vape on every hit, you could replace one of the Hydros with Furina, gain an 112% damage bonus, and then still vape on every single hit. A lot of Hyper Bloom teams also received this buff, like Alhaitham's team comp. Sino became good because of this. It is ridiculous how many teams got much stronger because of Furina. The Nation of Hydro made the Hydro element so ridiculously overpowered that I am fully confident that Hydro could get no new units for the significant future and would still be at the top of the meta charts just because of how much it blows away every other element. Almost every powerful reaction in the game needs to have a Hydro element. The most powerful hyper carry team has the Hydro element on it. You cannot escape this element if you play Genshin, and if that does not state how overpowered the element itself is, I don't know what will. That all being said, like the video, subscribe, support the new channel, and I'll see you later.